Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Triumph Strength and Performance podcast. On today's episode, we bring on Brad Couillard as a guest. Brad is a highly experienced powerlifting coach, the owner of Integrated Strength, and works one-on-one with Andy. The four coaches talk about Brad's upcoming as a coach, his perspectives on some technique, and other programming concepts. If you like this, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, and check out our content on Instagram at Triumph SNP. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
And then we got Megan. We got Megan doing the intro, so
Yeah.
you can just spitball whenever you want. Oh,
Yeah. All right. So first one was how I got started.
Yeah.
So I got into powerlifting in 2013 under Mike Zordas, coming out of bodybuilding, and it was more objective and obviously just for me a means to get stronger and get bigger. And just try to put on more mass and stuff for bodybuilding, and then I fell in love with it more and more. After that, I got the unfortunate, and now this is obviously precedes what we know now about PT and things like that. But I had massive hip pain, like to the point where squatting a plate would like make me want to take a knife to my hip. Like that's how bad it was. Excruciating pain, and couldn't walk. I had a noticeable moment where I had like when a labrum torn, it can like feels like a catchy feeling. I had one where it literally felt like knocked me out of bed. Like I stood up and fell over because I had no stability on the hip.
Jesus.
So I ended up having surgery and then kind of got into coaching. Obviously the connection of Zordos to Matt Gary. Matt Gary coached Mike Zordos prior to that. So obviously got into SSPT, and he was local, he was in Rockville, went down there a lot and trained myself. Heather trained a lot there, and got to know Matt and Susie, and got into the coaching realm. He was, hands down, was always been my between him and Mike have been my mentors from day one. And just spent a lot of time shadowing them, learning, asking questions, in-person coaching at meets, game day handling under Matt and Susie has been absolutely invaluable for what I know now. And I mean, that's a testament to obviously his skills on the world stage, that we've all just watched. So yeah, cannot thank them enough, first and foremost. But spent a lot of time with them, and then kind of got into, once I was kind of rehabbing both, I had both hips done. So in that time, I started kind of helping a few people for free, like everybody started. Just kind of learning, obviously learning based off the systems that I was learning from Matt and Mike. Mike T had a book come out. His one book, I forget the name of it. So learned some stuff from that. This was before YouTube really had a ton of information out there. We didn't have that resource. So you were learning more so just kind of like off the hand conversations, right? And kind of like the stuff we're doing on this and talking about different topics on podcasts. We were having it in like after meets. We were having it in like, personal training sessions, like with other coaches, like in the office, just waiting around and shooting the breeze and talking about things, and coming up with different strategies and different approaches. It wasn't as analytical, I think, as it used to be, or it wasn't as analytical as it is now. I think some of the perspective and introspect that comes from guys like Marcellus and Steve have really but have really set the tone for what coaching is now. The things that we see on powerlifting now, the things we see on YouTube, where you can sit back and look at something and go, okay, this is why it worked, right? Or this is why it didn't work. I know for me as a coach, I didn't do that as much in the beginning, and I was more of a technique guy, which we'll talk about shortly. The programming aspect was not my strong suit, and I'm 110% okay with admitting that. You get better with time, and the more that you put into it, the more that you get better at it. It's different if you're working if you're half in and half out, it's hard, right? You're going to punch the clock on in some instances. And then there's the people that are all in or just and mentally have checked that box where it's like, now I can really start to think critically and step back, and you're going to have these random moments where you're driving and you're like, oh, this lifter might need this, right? Those are the situations where you start to really learn and challenge your system. Obviously, with all the problem, clients that have problems here and there, right? We're not it. I love Instagram because it makes you feel like everybody's having a freaking standout day on all 3 lifts, and it's like, no, it doesn't happen. Like, one of the lifts is going to crash and burn, and then then it's going to be the saving grace on the next go around, and the other one's going to crash and burn, right? And then they're all 3 are on an even keel, right? And you're just kind of getting there, right? So we have to be able to understand why that are those moments setting us up for a slingshot effect to get better, or do we need to sit back and be critical and build that introspective, like, all right, what does this person need? So yeah, I mean, that for me over that time, I would say, like, my growth as a coach was very linear for a little while. And then I would say over the last 3 years, 4 years, the more that I've connected with other coaches and had these like sidebar conversations. Obviously there's, videos and stuff, but the sidebar conversations are where you really start to like build some like really cool programming ideas and like start to troubleshoot some people that you're close but you're not there, right? Because biases that we have, bigger lifter, they're not going to do as much, work capacity, blah blah blah, they're not going to recover as well. Smaller lifters can do more, blah blah. Dude, sometimes you throw that thing right out the window, and you have to, so it's not working, right? But we have questions we can ask and stuff like that. And that system that I would specifically have, with Steve and Marcellus and Sean Collins and all that I would say crop of coaches that has come up, has done that. And for for you guys being more on the come up and coming scene here, which is fantastic because we need it. You guys have powerlifting now, and you guys obviously have a group that you guys can bounce ideas off of and stuff like that, and have those conversations. Whereas some of us, we're more individual, right? We're our own coach, or we're the one of one, and having those groups of friends to be able to bounce ideas off of and just shoot the breeze and talk about powerlifting, and I think goes a long way in being able to connect what you're learning through your clientele, your mistakes, your clients not doing well, doing great, the videos, things like that. To me, I use the videos as a means to like verify what I'm learning. I think I learn more through my clients than I do. Like, I love the videos, but it's more so for me of like, is it connecting dots in different ways that I'm already learning from my n=1 situations. You know what I mean? So
I cannot emphasize how useful networking has been for us. Like, we kind of have like our little group chat of coaches who see eye to eye with us, and it's like easily by a landslide. I've learned so much more from them, and even Chris and Andy. Like, when we were starting out, we started like our business together because us 3 saw eye to eye and we learned from one another. But like, literally just talking and being passionate about what we're talking about and bouncing these ideas off of one another, and asking each other for advice and not being ashamed to do that. 100% I've learned more doing that than binging YouTube.
yeah. Oh, we don't have the answers, dude. I'll tell you straight up. Like, there's times where I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
Like, I have no qualms with saying that I'm not like, I will feed more into the imposter syndrome than I'll feed into confidence.
Yeah.
Because honestly, if I feed into confidence, it's very short lived. It's like, all right, cool, this worked. Awesome.
Yeah.
Then you're gonna have another problem right around the corner with somebody, right? Where you're like, damn, I don't have an answer for this, right? Or like, okay, I have to formulate a couple ideas. And I think that goes along with some feedback stuff where it's like being able to dig and ask the right questions to the athlete. Obviously, I love when athletes check the box and like, hey, this is what I think is going on. But some are not that in tune with what they're doing, right? And you have to kind of challenge them a little bit and question them to dig that information out. I think that feedback post that Steven and I did on the Two White Lights podcast, like it's great, but it's not fully downloaded into every lifter to where they can troubleshoot that. And as a coach, we have to figure out how to do that. So like, having this feedback system that works, and I think this ties into one of the questions about feedback and stuff like that we mentioned. Yeah, feedback should not be done during a session. It's too emotional. Now that being said, if it's a bad session and the emotion is going to run high, then yeah, it's probably going to leak out past the session, and you're going to have to really figure out what to do. And that's, I think, being able to, as a coach, give that, one, give feedback to them as an athlete, and then two, also kind of like challenge it, right? We're ultimately we're both there and for the same goal. If you think that we're not, then that's, that's an unfortunate situation, because I know for me, it's like every goal is like your goals are mine. Like I want you to get there. We just need to figure it out together. And that's, I lean heavily into the collaborative mindset of doing that. And that's why I'll ask questions to be able to understand what it is that we need to do. But no, feedback should not be done during the session. It should be done after. And even then, like as a client, I wouldn't want a client to be expecting some sort of like magical, profound response on every single session, right? Or, oh, this is what we're gonna do. Like everything's an experiment. We're sitting back and watching the experiment unfold, and then we're gonna sit back and look at what the results were for the most part. Obviously, if you're backsliding on a week 2 or week 3, okay, cool, we need to change something now, right? And I think we're kind of meshing into the other question of like mid-block adjustments. Yeah, if you're backsliding, these numbers are showing up like crap, you got to change something, right? And that's where those questions come into play, right? That's where the feedback comes into play, and that's where, I'm not necessarily looking at videos for technical, because we'll tie into the whole idea of technique response. I'm not so much looking at technical, I'm looking at performance, right? Because like I said, when I first started, I was like 20/20 vision on technique, and not it now it's a game of understanding the lifter, right? And understanding that technique is not this profound change that's going to occur for a lifter, right? It's very subtle. They've already built up a catalog of repetitions for that movement. You're not going to overhaul the system, otherwise you're going to start from scratch. And even then, it's still going to morph. Even if you give them the most extreme changes, it's still going to morph back into some diluted form of what they were doing before, right? So with the mid-block adjustments, why is it going to crap? What happened? Like, okay, so this is where you start asking questions. Some of the big questions, I kind of alluding to the Two White Lights, feedback chart is like, how do you feel? Do you feel fatigued? Do you feel strong? Do you feel weak? Do you feel recovered? Do you feel, like I said, you can go through a lot of those different questions. The main ones I kind of tackle are, do you feel fatigued? Rarely ever happens unless it's like week 4, week 5, like, where they're feeling really like crap. In the middle of the block, I rarely ever find like fatigue. Soreness, cool. That's probably going to come from accessory work more often than not because it's a little bit more direct to the tissue. Where bench presses, you're getting a lot of leg drive and arch and all this other stuff. You're probably not going to feel pecs a ton. You're probably going to feel things like dumbbell incline or dumbbell presses or, press arounds or cable flies, things like that. Right. That's where you're going to feel that more, stimulus because you're not doing it that much. Right. You only do it like twice a week, once a week. Right. Right. Devin, you're doing push-ups now, right? Radio push-ups.
Yes, I love them. They're awesome.
First week sucked, didn't it?
Yeah, first couple weeks I was
Serratus. It's not even pec. It's like the serratus. Like you're feeling that press out because your scap has space now.
It's a lot, yeah. It's also a lot of front delt I found too. I'm just feeling like, yeah, it took a while to, well, not a while, but like it definitely was a whole new like adaptation I had to
Correct.
adjust to.
Completely different than bench because you never get to full protraction ever. You force yourself into extension, which is going to have a mild level of retraction. You're not even getting close to an end range position of a serratus, right? Or a pec for that contraction, unless you're doing it like a sternal press around or a fly, right? Something that's at 80 ducks across the body, right? But in this case, now you're also getting yourself pushing away that rib cage, and it's contracting all that muscle in a different way and stretching it in a deeper way, especially if you're doing on those push-ups on dumbbells, right? And getting a deep stretch. So way different stimulus, right? And you feel it, right? So, that would be like, okay, cool. That might affect benching, right? From that standpoint of fatigue and, mid block, but I wouldn't really expect it to, cause a problem. I'm going to look more at the main lift and what that's telling us. And so if it's feeling recovered, but not strong, okay, you're lacking an intensity standpoint, right? And then I'll follow that up with if it's not intensity, right? Because I kind of lean into if it's recovered but not strong, I might lean into the intensity a little bit. But if they lack that pop feeling, I'm looking at volume. And that's where they're coming in like coming in where they're doing enough, they're doing most of the work or they're doing all the work or whatever, but they're coming in, they're not feeling that you know what I'm talking about, that nice like springy feeling that feels good in the muscles. It just feels a little like recovered, but there's recovered but not strong, but the back down work feels okay, but the top end's not there. I'm going to look maybe a little bit more towards intensity, right? If it's lacking the pop, I'm going to look a little bit more towards the volume. And that can be that's everything that leads into that session, right? So if we're talking about a primary day, I'm leading everything into that. So what does the microcycle look like early in the week or whatever, the week prior, if the primary day is at the beginning of the block or beginning of the week or whatever. So I'm looking at everything that kind of ebbs and kind of flows into that day, right? And then if it's kind of like borderline, it's not like a total on train wreck, I'll probably like let it go another week and then see what happens. And if it's the same thing, then I know it's something that we're doing either through the setup or through, are we pulling back? Are we detraining early in the block, right? Because that's what it is. The lacking pop is a detraining effect. So I'll look at that, right? And yeah, if we're not meeting the baseline, and we're not, building up volume increases from block to block, then yeah, I'm gonna probably change something, right? So whether it's, let's say for a bench, I might add a heavy exposure or bump up the exposure on the secondary day, or if we formulate that, it has a primer or tertiary before the, primary day, I might put a single on there if it doesn't have it. And there's exceptions to this because I'll go into that in a second, but yeah, if it's lacking pop, I might bump the reps up on that tertiary leading into it, and I kind of start closer versus further away. I'll start at the one that's a little bit more immediate to that session, especially if the secondary or the other sessions are feeling okay, right? And they're checking the boxes, but the primary is just not there. That's kind of where I'll lead to. Typically, I don't find that the volume too much is the issue for bench. Typically find that's like an intensity game, potentially a timing game of like, where that last session is prior to the primary, or the secondary relative to the primary. For squat, I tend to find that it's a little bit more of a volume game where they're lacking that pop and how much that average intensity needs to be on the, across the session, whether they need that heavy exposure on the top end and then a really light exposure on the back down, or if like the secondary day needs to be like a very like almost straight set, ascending set type approach at like a medium intensity. Just depends on, what the athlete's telling me. Because you can take, in my opinion, you can take any system, any microcycle you design, and you start applying those tools to it and being able to answer the questions that you're looking for, and you can start to make the adjustments and it'll morph into what it needs to be. Right? Unless it's like horribly freaking wrong, which that's where you're going through block to block and it's like, this is just not, there's something just not there. Right? And you go through a block or two and it just sucks. Right? Then I might go, okay, cool, we need to change something up completely. Like we need a hard reset. Right? And that might be challenging your biases, right? That might be like, oh, big guy's he's not doing a ton of volume. Okay, give him a shit ton of volume and see what happens. Like, what do you got to lose at this point? You're not going anywhere, right? And you might, and progress is, completely in the eye of the beholder. Is it volume? Is it intensity? Is it, 1 RM, 3 RM, whatever. But once they start kind of getting that train rolling, then you can kind of ride that and with that structure and all that, and being able to formulate how to get to the finish line. Right.
Yeah, I like what you said about feedback and how you interpret that, because I know me and Chris were talking about this the other day, where I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth, Chris, but there's an athlete of yours who was like reporting just being ridiculously fatigued, and you were looking at the past, like, I don't know, block of training, and they were touching like 70% at most for the past few weeks, if I'm not getting that
I
mistaken.
don't remember the conversation, but maybe.
He cut a set short or something, right? Because he was feeling it just way too much in his low back, and it was. Do you remember the conversation we had or no?
I don't remember the conversation.
I think it was about Ellen.
Oh. Yeah, that was a bit of a different context, though.
Yeah, but kind of along that, like, there's been so many times where someone's like giving me feedback, like especially in like that example with Alan, where it's like they'll say, "Oh, I felt like super beat up." I feel like we talked about this a little bit on a different podcast too, but like someone feels super beat up, but it's like you kind of like Brad was saying, you have to like push them a little bit in the right direction to actually like almost like double check if that's actually how they felt, because it's like, does the data like really show that you're gonna feel that way when historically you haven't? Like there was someone I coach right now whose bench was going super poorly for a long time, and she was saying, "Oh, I feel beat up. I feel beat up. I feel beat up." And then after some time, we found that it was just like she didn't know how to like give that feedback. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like you have to almost like second guess what someone's saying sometimes. You know what I mean? I don't know if you guys have ever found that, but like I've definitely had to like ask questions in return sometimes to almost have someone like give me something more accurate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sometimes can't take the feedback 100% at face value, just because some people don't know how to interpret that stuff.
Correct.
I feel like with specifically fatigue too, it's like a lot of the time people just like misconstrue that for, feeling detrained or being understimulated, whatever it may be. Like fatigue specifically, I feel like people are bad at being like, oh yeah, I'm fatigued, versus just like, no, you're just detrained.
Yeah.
Any session that comes in weak is just like, oh, I think I was a little fatigued today.
Yeah.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I don't think like, I don't know about how many people like in the powerlifting, let's just say the most of the powerlifting space is on the, the younger spectrum now. Like y'all didn't go through small off. Okay. Like run small off base meso and let me know what fatigue is.
Yeah.
Right. Run Shako. Right. Let me know. Because it sucks. You're literally in pain. Like you can't move. Like every joint is stiff. Like fatigue is like, you're more often not going to feel that level of fatigue. Like until the very end. Like let me ask this. How many of y'all came out of a meet and like, I feel great. I feel awesome. Right. And then 2 days later, you're like, oh no, I'm not okay. I can't move. My body's like not moving weight right now. Right. That's fatigue, right? Let me know how many times that happens in your training cycles, right? Along those lines, to where you're like, you're getting restless sleep, you're not, and yeah, if you don't sleep well and don't keep up on your variables, sure. But like, I'm not expecting lifters to get 8 hours of sleep at night, eat every macro protein down to the decimal. Like, 80-20 rule exists. So if you're getting 6 hours a night, whatever, cool. But if you're running on 3 or 4 for a week or two at a time, but if you have a one-off night, I don't expect your session to go to complete crap. I expect you to not move well or have the cognitive like desire to train or motivate. Like that I can understand, right? But recovery is, for the most part, if you're doing at least checked most of the boxes, you're probably okay. Right? Especially at the younger ages. I don't, get older, obviously it can play more of a role, just because the body changes, right? Your hormones change, like everything changes, right?
Agreed.
Yeah, but no, I don't expect a lot of people to feel that like hard fatigue to where it's like, completely detrimental to training. So that's why I'm like, okay, cool. Like, let's look at it from this standpoint. Let's look at it from that standpoint to be able to make the adjustments that we need to make. So
To go back to what you were saying earlier about sometimes we have like these biases, bigger weight lift or heavier weight lifters can handle more work, lighter weight lifters handle less work, handle more work. Do you find yourself really relying on those things at this point when you're like starting with a new client, or is it just kind of like just individual basis every single time?
well, you have to have a system to start somewhere with somebody,
Yep.
right? It's when it fails that you have to have something else, right? So, like I said, you might have a system that you work off of, right? A way that you get your foot in the door with their programming. And then you use your tools to manage it and see if it works, right? What happens when it like just does not freaking work? You have to swing the pendulum the other way at some point if you're going to run into those issues, right? And you don't know until you try, right? Because again, you're relying off what the lifter is telling you and what the data is telling you, and just kind of like how they're performing, right? And when it doesn't go the way you want to, you're like, all right, something's got to freaking change. And that was the whole idea. I don't know the context fully, but it's a general idea of kind of like what pivot blocks might be. Our pivot week is where they just completely wash it out and then they jump right back, then they're kind of back into what they know works, right? And I'm not saying that necessarily needs a pivot. I think they're valuable in their own right. But if you're not getting the response that you want, go the other way. Challenge yourself. Challenge your 180 thinking. Like, we all have it. Even athletes have it, right? Athletes are going to go into the session because it's been explained on so many levels that smaller lifters can handle more, right? They can handle more volume. They can recover better, blah, all that kind of stuff. Like, bigger lifters can't. Like, they're going to be more, selective on their intensity. They might do bigger jumps. Like, no, I mean, and there's obviously like there's the specialized lifters, right? That they're super specialized into that lift or with the squatter or whatever. Bench, they need X, Y, and Z frequency, right? A lot of times the ones that you're having trouble with are probably ones that are gonna break the mold. Straight up. Like, and you have to kind of like, all right, screw it, let's go the other way. What do I have to lose? Maybe I'm gonna swing that pendulum over and then my feedback is gonna take me back a little bit. Right? You don't know until you try, right? Especially if you have time to try, right? Otherwise, you better have a bread and butter program backed up and ready to go.
100%.
It's yeah, like, and it might take some tweaking on that, right? There's, you're really trying to make sure that you have the responses you need as a coach to be able to kind of read between the lines. And it's little things like, It's like a lifter going into a cut, a weight cut for a meet, and you're expecting X, Y, and Z weights on the bar, and you're like, uh-oh, this is not showing up the way we want to. And then, they say, feeling like kind of small and flat. Okay, is it a recovery issue, or is it because you just cut, a kilo, 2 kilos, 3 kilos from water weight or gut cut or whatever over the last several days that now you just feel different, right? Your body feels different. And then it's damage control, right? Then you're just trying to make lifts and stay on the board. Or is it because they came in flat, right? And I don't, to explain what flat is, it's kind of like a bodybuilding term where you do a show and you don't get enough, carbs and you don't get that pump to go out on the stage and you look your best, right? And really look full and vascular and veiny and muscular and shredded, all that kind of stuff. You come in flat is the term, right? And that's how I refer to it, where like someone's like, oh, I feel so good, but I don't feel strong. Flat, right? So you're just not there. You're flat. It's a flat performance.
If you have a lifter who, say it's a case where you've gone however many blocks in a row without really making any meaningful progress, and you've been making like little tweaks as you go, nothing's really working. How big of an overhaul are you willing to make in one block to another if you're in a space where you're just like, we need to have just something completely flip on its head for it to work?
That's where I'm like, all right, what are we learning from this? Like, what are you feeling? That's where I'm probably going to be like, I'm really going to start to dig, right? You're getting some surface level responses, and plan to discuss this at some point or another. But like, you can't trust your athlete for the most part. No offense, but like, athletes are too close to their training. It's too intertwined to emotions and things like that. And as a coach, sometimes you have to take the reins of being able to say, why is this not working? Like, and that's where you're going to start to really dig deeper at their level. Like, has anything external wise changed? No. Okay, cool. Most people don't. Like, my basement flooded like a week ago. I haven't slept in like several days. I went to bed at 5:30 the other night, woke up at 7:30 with the kids. Like, felt like crap yesterday, right? And I've been doing that for like the better part of a week and a half, trying to deal with this and coach and have kids and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, not a normal week for me. Yeah, I don't feel great. Training sucks. It's okay, fine, I'm all right. But like, most people don't run into that, but very few often, right? Unless there's like some severe, whatever, right? Some huge stress, right? Or it's a project at work, they're at work all day, or for 14 hours, and it's high stress, a ton of pressure on yourself to perform in that department, or relationship stress, or whatever. There's tons of different types of stress. How often does that happen? Right? How often? Not that, right? You guys can take from your own personal experiences. When you've had a bad week, it's usually reserved to about a week or two, give or take. Right?
Yeah.
Unless there's like a medical thing or something like that that's really kind of leaking on. But we're like, for the most part, everybody's externals and their variables with their lives are pretty even keel for the most part. If their habits are terrible, that's a different story. But if somebody's decently sleeping, eating, whatever, all that stuff, like you're gonna have to dig, right? Something with the program. And you're gonna have to swing it probably the other way and challenge it. And then start somewhere. Like, you start low and build up. I mean, you're gonna progress it anyway. You're gonna linearly progress. Right. I just got off a call where I'm like, like we're doing 8s on bench press on the back downs on the secondary, like a top single on the secondary, not as heavy as the primary day, right? 2 by 7 and then a 2 by 8. I said, I don't care what the 8s are, as long as you're not backsliding, putting like 10 kilos under what you're capable of doing. It could be the same damn thing for every single block. I don't care, as long as those the 7s and the single or whatever, they're progressing the way we want to. That's there to give you some pop, right? And I'm that's the whole how Steve runs things, where he's like, he might just tweak the one day, might just tweak the primary day, the only thing, right? Or you might tweak 2 things, right? Whatever. You don't necessarily have to change a ton. You just use the information that they're giving you, or the information that you have to dig out of them, right? To be able to say, if someone's like, hey, I feel small. I feel, I don't feel like myself. I feel stiff all the time. Like, these are clues on what potentially they need. If they're feeling stiff and achy all the time, that's some fatigue, right? We've all felt that. Okay, cool. Give them some lighter loads and more volume and move them around. Just give them general movement, like more, give them some high rep belt squat. It doesn't need to be at 8 or 9 RPE. Just give them some, right? So yeah.
I was something kind of similar to what Chris asked, but when you take on a new athlete, and one of the main reasons I'm asking this is because when I started working with Steve a little over a year ago, in comparison to what I was doing in the past, it was so different. But like when you take on a new athlete, how like kind of exactly what Chris asked, but like especially in that intro block, are you going to consider that much of what they were doing from a programming perspective before, or are you willing to completely overhaul and disregard that?
Time and place, right? If you got time to work with them and you got blocks to work with, then yeah, I think that you can impose a little bit more I'm the coach type vibe,
Sure.
right? But if you need to kind of get them ready for something pretty soon, I'm not going to completely overhaul something, right?
Right.
I kind of need to lean into some of the bread and butter tactics, and then tweak where I think might be a more beneficial option based on the questions I'm going to ask. Because you're going to ask those questions all the time. You're going to be a broken record. It's just you might get different answers or different, responses, or same thing, different responses, different answers. Like, when you ask them whether it's the first time you work with them or if it's the 6th block in, right? Or, hey, they had a life, they changed departments and now they're at a different gym or their different job or whatever, that it's gonna change, right? And then you're gonna know it as a coach, you're gonna know what something's up when you don't get the responses that you're normally used to, right? Or something, they're like, they used to message me after every session. It used to be really detailed. Then I started getting these 1 sentence answers, and I only got like 1 or 2 videos, and it's like, it kind of goes for like a week or two, and you're like, yeah, something's up. What's going on? Right. And they're, time, every once in a while, like, oh, no, everything's fine. I just, going, everything's been checking boxes, we're good. The numbers look like speeds look good. Okay, cool. We're all on the same page. And then there's the times where like, yeah, something's up. Something's not right. What are you feeling? What's going on? And they'll start to break it down for you a little bit more in detail. And you can kind of, go from there. But yeah, I mean, back to your question, like in terms of like, yes, I'm going to use those biases based on what the data and what they're bringing to the table. And you ask those questions and it will either say, hey, it leans into the bias or it leans away from the bias. And then you can kind of start to put the puzzle pieces together and then, sit back and look at it. Like I kind of start with like, all right, what days of the week do they need to train? Right? What are my options in terms of fatigue, and spacing and recovery and this, that, and the other? Like, okay, cool. Now, like, all right, how is this going to fit with what I need to write for them or what I think is going to work well for them? Based on their responses, right? Or based on what they bring to, what training data they bring to the table. And then you're able to kind of, formulate your approach, and you might write it out a couple times or write, a sketch down and be like, that doesn't look right. You can write another one. And then kind of fine tune. And then you're going to get into the nitty gritty details of how many top sets, do you like, I got a guy that came to me and then was like, he had a lot of back tightness, like, stuff. And I was like, okay, well, we're clearly not going to push deadlift ultra hard. Right. And, we did a lot of like submax volume, and that was his bread and butter. That worked well for him. Cool. All right. We're on the same page. I think that's a great idea. The squat was, cleaning up, how do we approach that? So I kind of like spaced out his timing to make sure that he was getting enough recovery. I limited how many top sets he was doing. I gave him enough stimulus on the one day, but not to kill him. I went with options like belt squats and things like that to manage how much tension was in his back through his movements and stuff like that. Worked great. Awesome. Like kicked, absolutely crushed it. Then there's the happy mistakes, right? What's the happy mistakes is like, all right, on a week 3, he's like, hey, I decided to take my week 4 single on bench because I had some stuff to do. Amazing session. Then week 4, even better, right? Got another 5 kilos, which was already it was already a huge win on week 4. Then another 5 on week, around the week 3, and then into week 4. Cool. Happy mistake. We're going to keep that intensity up a little bit more on week 3. Still working, still kicking. So, there's those situations too. So, yeah, lean into it when you feel like you need to, and lean out of it when you don't, like when you just like, yeah, this isn't working, or like, because more than likely the other coaches or them themselves have tried some of the levels of bias. Everybody has it now at this point, right? Whether they directly learned it from some videos and things like that, or they indirectly learned it from talking to people in the gym, right? Because you'll hear people spout off like oh, I can recover a little bit better, X, Y, and Z. It's like, okay, cool, great. And then the data says yes, cool. Sometimes it doesn't. Like, no, it's clearly not. That's why we're going to challenge it. Like, that's why we're going to go the other way.
Right.
We want to talk technique stuff.
Let's do it.
We so yeah, like you sort of kind of already touched upon it, but like just more so on that system versus the individual thing you were mentioning prior.
Yep.
But yeah, like in general, kind of curious how do you go about applying your system of teaching technique to
Sure.
the individual, and where you kind of like where you originated from and how you learned to teach technique and whatnot.
Okay. Yeah. So I've been through pretty much every avenue of technique. I've gone through like every phase of life with that. From mobility WOD, Kelly Starrett, supple leopard to clinical athlete to PRI to everything. Like everything and anything. Connor Harris, Bill Hartman, every model. And they can be helpful, right? You learn things, pick up things here and there, but you're going to filter out the things that don't work, right? And it is playing the person. The person has a pattern, right? That's their pattern. And you can sit there and apply your system to it, and it may work or it may not work, right? And there's people that are extremely textbook, and then there's people that are extremely unconventional. So what I typically look for, my system is kind of like, all right, is there something glaring to me? Like, is there's like something significantly out of whack, right? The bar path is all over the place, right? And this kind of ties into the whole what is good technique, right? Can they meet the standard? Is it efficient? Is it optimal, right? Is it for force production? Okay. And I'm going to start there and kind of ask those questions and look at it and go, okay, cool, this works. For squat, I tend to find weird bar path and depth issues, right? That's the kind of, the general consensus of it. And it's not necessarily a center of mass thing all the time. Sometimes it's just how they move, and you have to kind of feed into it and maybe make subtle adjustments so that you're getting them to do what you want. And for bench, it's there's the idea of elbow depth. There's understanding that a lot of your arch is going to come from hip extension and pressure into the neck, not necessarily thoracic flex mobility, because you only have so much T-spine mobility. Otherwise we'd be able to like basically almost like bend over and touch yourself, bend backwards and touch yourselves like on the back of the leg or something. Like, you can't really do it, right? For the most part, we can get really tall and that's about it. But if you want to leverage more out of it, you're going to do it through a full system approach, right? So think of like, anyone doesn't like the Cobra, like in high school, the Cobra stretch where they kind of like, you kind of
Oh,
push
yeah.
your, right? It's same thing. Like that's not your, I mean, that's T-spine. That's just spinal flexibility in general, but you're doing it through hip extension, right? Because your hips are being slammed into extension into the floor, and then you're pushing yourself away up into that, right? Well, if you want to connect to the ground, then okay, cool, do it through your legs, right? So those are the systems that I'm kind of like using to kind of start. And then I'm feeding off of that, like, does it work for this athlete or does it not? Am I, is this checking the box for me? And then, deadlift is like center of mass issues, maybe just some adrenaline kind of yanking on the bar, too much slack take up, too early, things like that. For the most part. And then there's just the idea of like, okay, just looking at it like, all right, aesthetically, does this look good? Right? We all kind of know what good technique looks like. It's not this like set standard. It's just, does this look like solid technique? Is this something I can work with that we don't really need to change? Right? Does it meet, does it check those boxes? And it's just, you use that and you go, okay, cool. This is my starting point, right? This is what I'm seeing with an athlete. And then from there, going into the nitty gritty of actually changing something. Right. And, I've said this on the videos too and stuff like that. It's all setup. Predominantly setup things are going to get you the biggest bang for your buck in terms of making adjustments. Right. There's a variety of styles, and you can always look at like other lifters that have similar styles, because you're going to see it in different ways with different athletes that you coach or you just watch, right? There's like the super tight backs in the squat where they're really compressed and strong and really arched in their, compression in their back. And then there's others that are very fluid and kind of like are super springy and just drop down so easily and bounce out. And it's like, oh, that's really, amazing. And then the other ones that are like all the way through their lift. Right. So you just learn off of those styles and understand how to coach that style. Right. And you're going to have that as coaches to be able to kind of go through. Now, the way that I do it now is I'm going to explain a setup adjustment for somebody if that's what I think is needed, right, to get them in a better position. Because you have control. That is where you are your best. Like that is where you can have your feedback, your ability to make the adjustment and set it. It's people shuffling their feet on the platform after they've unracked the squat. That's because you have control to do it. Right? So if you're getting your stance like thrown off on a squat or whatever, just take that time to set your feet right. Right? What width, what toe angle, don't just rush through it. That you have all the time in the world to make that adjustment. That's a split-second adjustment. Like, oh no, my two's too forward, I need to tilt it out. Oh no, my foot's a little too close, let's shift it out. Done. Right? Where you don't have time or you don't have the ability to make any real adjustments is during the freaking movement. I wouldn't go to a golfer and tell them how to downswing into the ball. Go ask Steph Curry how he shoots the basketball. He can tell you like how he sets his stance or how he kind of gets there, but after that, he's not going to know. It's open. It's free. It's like a dynamic activity. You don't have that ability to control that, right? Same thing with a squat up and down, right? You don't need to cue a lot in a squat. You just drop, right? Move the bar up and down. Right? Just make sure that you're balanced and, everything's stacked up. And like, those are all setup things. It's 99% setup, 1% execution. Right. And to be fair, like, yes, we're powerlifters. Weights are not moving at fast speeds, but it's still a dynamic activity. We're still athletes. Right. It's just our bar speed isn't fast like Olympic lifting. It's not throwing a baseball at 99 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour. Right. Or throwing a football or lining up, whatever, right? Pick any other dynamic athletic activity, right? A cut on a football field or basketball court, right? You wouldn't cue that to somebody. You maybe like slow them down and kind of show them what you're aiming for, but that's a moving target based on the context of the situation. You're not going to have that on a plane surface. So it's more so the fact that like you're building your process and being able to execute that in any situation and understanding where the subconscious is going to just take over. And that's the idea of natural organization, right? So I reference a lot of other sports when it comes to movement because it's just a lot easier, right?
Are you also a big fan on like the whole idea of like movement constraints and variation work and whatnot to kind of help someone self-align there instead of something like verbal
Yeah.
cueing?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just understanding what the movement does for a person. Okay. If someone drops really fast in a squat and it's almost to the point where it's detrimental, to where they're getting thrown around a lot or their bar path is all over the place. You either can align them better with either, maybe it's a little bit ball of big toe pressure at the top of their squat to kind of get that bar a little bit more on top of things, right? Or, maybe they're more lengthier and they need to learn to fall better, right? Chest fall, right? Steve's video, right? That's relative position. That's the hinge aspect of your hips getting into hip flexion, right? So if they can't do that in a squat and they're staying too upright, I don't know if tempo and pause might be the best option for them because you're already feeding into what they do. Right? You know what I mean? Like somebody that stays too upright, the knees kind of push out and then they kind of collapse over, the knees collapse in, right? You know what that style looks like. Okay. So how do you help them with that movement constraint or that movement, what their tendency is? Okay. Well, I mean, I'm not going to probably give them a lot of pauses or tempos because it reinforces their ability to do it maybe every once in a while. But maybe I want them to kind of drop a little bit quicker and get a little bit more stretch reflex and one that's going to get them to get in depth a little bit deeper because more often than not, if they're doing tempo and pause, they're probably cutting a little close, right? So being able to get that springiness and kind of get that fall and that relative motion going on and get a little bit more athletic ability, like they're going to do that with higher rep, lighter weight type stuff. Or you're going to give them, you might need a movement constraint. SSB is a great option for that, where they're kind of just constrained here and like, okay, cool, let's just go up and down. Right? Or, a belt squat or a hack squat or something like that gives them a sense of like, I need you to pump out some reps kind of deal, full like Tom Platz for me here. You know what I mean? Like, so that you kind of break their mold a little bit. Right. And that's also feeds into the idea too of like what their technique looks like and what is going to complement them. If they're super hingy squatters and they're like lawn chair folding, cool. Give them some more quad work. Get them a little bit more upright so that they're not into this extreme position and their depth is not there on game day and their back is destroyed from squatting. Okay, give them a shit ton of hack squat and some SSB and give them a little bit more upright so that you're helping them out. Versus the person that's a little bit too upright and tall, and get them to lean over a little bit more, right? Get them to fall a little bit better. Right. And then, you can base that on your, that's your back down work right there, or that's your supplemental work. So I think it is very valuable. I think it's a super great tool. The big tool I'm on lately is emulating, right? Not cueing, emulation, mimic. Like, pick somebody, like if you have a lifter that has a problem, you're like, all right, hey, this person is doing what we want them to do. I want you to go watch this. Right. And that ingrains this visual idea in their mind. If that's how they learn, if they're visual learners and they can see it in their mind and they know exactly what they're going to do, but they don't know how to do it. Right. Or they don't know what exactly that they're doing, but they do it. Right. That's a great way to teach somebody. Because if you sit there and cue them up the wazoo with things, their brain is like, you can't negotiate it. Then they're hesitant and they don't know what they're doing. Versus like, hey, it's pick any sport, right? Let's go back to another sport. Let's go to football drills, right? Baseball drills, things like that. Hey, I need you to, go down to the ball in a ground ball drill and put your glove out with your hand on the side and kind of just and watch the ball feed it into the, hand-eye coordination into the glove. What is hand-eye coordination? It's a freaking subconscious process. It's not like if someone comes up and tries to smack you, you're going to go like this and dodge it, right? Subconscious. I'm not going to go, like it's not fluid. So why would you sit there and try to cue your squat to be some sort of like junky joint control, like joint focused movement? It's not. Just go squat. Right? And anybody do personal training? Somebody comes in like, Gen Pop, and they're like, hey, like, let me see your body weight squat. Okay, cool. What are you going to tweak? Okay, cool. Maybe their stance, maybe put some heel elevation on. Do it again. Okay, wow, that looks amazing. Like, you don't, like, with all these systems, like, you're dealing more with the person than anything else. You're using your systems of kind of like as a back pocket, like, will this work? And you might try some things with them. But sometimes cueing doesn't always work, and some people literally will reject it. They'll basically tell you, this sucks. I don't like it. They're hesitant. They're uncomfortable. They don't know what they're doing. Then don't cue them. Give them a visual. Don't even, like, you send them a video. This is what I want you to do. You don't, there's no cue in it. Just send it. Hey, this is what I want you to do. Do it. Just, I don't care what it looks like. For you, I just want you to do it based on what you see in your mind. Like, go emulate it. Right? You do all these lifters do it now with all these, different things on the platforms and all these, celebrations and stuff like that. Right? You're emulating your favorite person. Right? Play a sport, pick a pro athlete and emulate them. You're going to do it. You know exactly, like, you're going to watch them do all the things that they're going to do, and then you're going to go do it. And you don't know what they're doing. You don't know. You're not cueing it on purpose. You're just like, all right, cool. This is what they're doing. I'm going to go do it. Powerlifters need that a lot of times, because it gets them out of their own head to just execute the way we want them to. And it's a fluid, like, I'm going to go for it type vibe. Whereas I think a lot of people, and including myself, I've done it before. Like, I've done it before. Like, they get in their mind of like, this needs to be perfect. There is no perfect. There's close and close enough. Right? And there's a level of natural organization that needs to exist. And sometimes cueing, like, I'll reserve mostly my cueing and setups, but not so much in the movement itself. Like, for bench, I tell people just watch the bar go up and down. Set your neck pressure, set your feet, set your hands, set your grip. Just watch the bar go up and down. I sure as hell don't know anybody worried about their elbows or wrist positions a whole lot on a dumbbell bench. Why the hell would you worry about in a comp bench? You got more important to worry about. Where's your start command, your press command, things like that. Outside of that, bar just goes up and down. Scapulas are going to move. Elbows are going to break. Cool. We're good. As long as you're not actively cueing, tucking, or funny things like that, just let this stuff happen. And then outside of that, if you need to make some adjustments, you can move the scope with setup things. Okay, someone's too, kind of a closer grip. Okay, cool. Well, the wider we go, the more our hands turn out on a bench press. Okay, cool. So they're not going to internally rotate their hands as hard as we, in a full-on bulldog grip position, and they're just going to be kind of here, and they're going to watch the bar go up and down. Cool. Get to the touch point. You don't need to. I personally don't think you need to reach your arch up to the bar. I think that's already done with all the things that you need to do. If anything, to me, that's like changing the relative position. Right now, we're talking about just the tendencies of things, right? So, like, in a squat, and I told you to say I told you to stay super upright, right? How far can you squat before you start to get kicked? It's probably not that far. Okay, but some people try to do that. That's changing. You're basically trying to squat like an L. That is not a powerlifting squat. Sorry. Unless you have like the shallowest hip sockets and your body can navigate that quickly, great. But if you're going to purposely do something like that, you're not creating a relative position around the hip. You're using a lot of quad, right? Okay, go do a hack squat instead. Like, that's easy. I can do that, right? But, for a bench press and somebody tries to overreach their arch, well, are they retracting? No, they're depressing hard, right? Like, do your, the Cobra thing, right? If you keep pushing up, you're just compressing your lats and arching, right? You're not retracting. So like, why would if I reach my rib cage up? Well, I'm pulling my bar down and away from me. I'm going to tuck to a degree. Versus, okay, I'm set. I've got the biggest arch I can get. Cool. Now I'm gonna let my scaps and my shoulders and everything work. Whoop, watch the bar go up and down. Now I'm going to get the expansion, right? The loading, the retraction, the internal rotation, whatever you want to call it, right? Now that's naturally occurring. It's also going to get your elbows lower too. So, yeah, I mean, they're like, and the same thing for deadlift, like from all intents and purposes, it's a jump off the floor. So put yourself in the best position to do that relative to what mobility and stance and all that stuff you want to do. And like, to me, like for a deadlift, it's the wedge that's the wedge, right? Your hip hike is a backswing in a golf, right? You're going to kind of load up if you're going to do like a hip hike and wedge, or if you're just going to be more of a true hinge and wedge, right? Where you're like, all right, I'm going to create my space between me and the bar before I wedge through my hinge, right? And you might not have a big wedge at that in terms of that position, right? There's your minimal wedging type idea versus somebody that might hip hike and create a ton of space and then really be able to compress and kind of create their position off the floor. But to me, a wedge is the dynamic activity, right? What are you gonna like? Okay, I need to cue my knees out. I need to cue more chest up. Okay, get more chest up in your setup if you need to do that, right? Or just think like, I need to go up with the bar. Like everybody knows what a wedge looks like, right? You can visualize it. If I say wedge, you know exactly what I'm referring to. More often, you're going to think of a big one, right? Everybody's kind of like, all right, I know what that looks like. Then you can go into examples of like, with positional, things for people, for certain individuals, right? Eric Lapointe, beautiful deadlifter, absolutely beautiful. He does the pre-wedge, right? The little pre-wedges that he likes to do. Okay, cool. And then he does it. He's just getting a rhythm for it. That's all he's doing, right? And he's excellent at it. And you can visualize it, or you can go watch a video like, I know exactly what he's doing. And then you go take, hey, there's a bar over there. Go do it. Let me just go see you, go emulate that. Go try it out. You don't need a cue for that. You just don't. Like, this is what he's doing. Like you can see it, you can taste it, and know exactly what you're doing. And this goes into the idea of like I said, other sports, other things, right? Being able to know exactly what you're going to do before you do it. Because you cannot change anything in the middle of the movement. You can't. It's dynamic. There is nothing to change. Deal with it after if you got a problem with it. That's to me like you have all the time in the world to set up and make it right. After that, nothing's going to save you. Nothing. Just execute the lift. That's it. And that feeds into that way of teaching it, because it's a lot easier to tell someone just go do it, and then let's look at it and see what it looks like.
I know that you will like video call Andy and kind of run through technique stuff with him sometimes.
Yep.
Do you find that is like kind of along the lines of like what you're talking about as far as emulating something goes? Do you find that like literally walking through someone as they do it is helpful for the most part, or is that is that something you do with a lot of people that you coach?
I do. It really depends on. So here now let's feed into the little bit more of a psychological, right? The psychological is, are you going to feel safe trying something with somebody like, you're just going to go through it. Some people get really nervous and they don't like, they're uncomfortable by like being watched, right? And in this case, like sometimes I'm just watching to see if there's something that I'm missing, right? And I can see it differently. We were coaching at this meet in Maryland, and my wife was lifting, and I've watched her deadlift more times than I can count in training, right? And I'm watching her warm up, and I'm like, she's just wedging. There's no up, right? You guys know what I'm referring to, like it almost like it's not even called scooping, but I'd call it just it's like wedge, and then there's like a delay, and then the bar leaves the floor. And it's not like force production. It's like, I'm here, now I'm gonna go. Right. And I was like, get that weight off the floor. Like up. Like, I don't care about your wedge. Go up. Boom. Snappiness came right on back. Just right there in the warm-ups. She only has 3. That's it. And we took it to the platform, and she pulled a freaking massive PR with more in the tank. So like, sometimes you're going to see it a little differently when you're watching them, right? And then at the same time, ask them what rep feels good, or like, you can visually see it as a coach, like, that was a better rep. Can't put my finger on it yet, but that was a better rep. Okay, go why. Ask why. Why was it better rep? I'll use John Song as an example. Trying to get his deadlift back to like that really powerful deadlift for him, right? And we're close. We're working on some things, kind of, trying at this, try that. And I watched one of his sets one day, and I'm like, rep 1, a little slow. Rep 2, way better. Like, why? So I watched him over and over and over a couple more times. The difference is how much he created in his space difference, and how much he created when he hip hiked. I find that most people on the first rep, they're a little pensive with how much hip hike they create. They're hesitant. Like, for the people that do that method, right? They're hesitant. They're like guarded by it. But then that second one, they're like, and it's not a stretch reflex thing, right? Let's clear that up. It's not like a touch and go where they're in a better position. But I've seen a lot of people where they create a ton of, like, their like hips are way up in the air, and then there's just that rhythm right into it. They kind of broke the seal, and it's like, boom, there's that deadlift, and it's like, whoa, that was so much better. Okay, cool. Do it on the first one. Like, nothing changed. It's not any different in terms of setup. You're in the exact same damn position. Just do that. Right. And then you look at that, and you have that, and you're watching that on a call, and you're like, all right, that was better. Right. And so, yes, I think calls are very helpful. For one, if there's something you have to explain, or kind of like, hey, this is what we're going to tweak in your setup or whatever, and then going to watch the results, and then being able to say, hey, this is what I want you to do now. Like, okay, cool. This is good. You're good. Check the box. Go do your thing, and let me watch. Right. And then, okay, cool. Like, there, maybe, hey, just shift the bar a little bit away from your shin on the deadlift, or hey, make sure you're starting with more midfoot pressure, maybe not ball and big toe on the squat. Like, that's too much pressure forward for you. You're getting all jacked up and too forward, and falling over, and bars now out in front of toes or whatever. Let's bring it back into that midfoot, maybe more to the heel to a degree, and then go ahead and crank your rep. Right. Because like, even with if you think about a hinge, like, if you put yourself into a lot of heel pressure, you're either going to stay really upright or going to fall right over. Right. So think about how that happens in a squat. Like, if someone's like, if they're in their toes too much and they're too upright, okay, cool. Shift them back and see if that allows them to kind of tilt a little bit, forces them to be thrown a little bit forward and down. Right. Or if you tried everything, change squat shoes, change stance, like, those are just easy things. And then at that point, I'm not cueing them anything different. Just go ahead and squat. Let me see what you got. Right. Marcellus has done that with his squat. Like, we tried different shoes. We tried a couple different things. The ones are where it's at, man, for him. Like, it works for him. It literally, it's that for him is what feels at home, and he cranks his reps. And he's a great example of somebody that lacked pop in the prep, and then eventually I just overdosed the volume for 3 weeks, and it was great. And sometimes it wasn't a factor of like technique. It was just a programming adjustment. And at that point, then you're feeding into the idea of like, okay, well, do I need to make a constraint for them? A movement constraint selection, right? And you're not looking to take a system and apply it to them and be able to, this is it. This is all you're going to get. Right. And their body just resists and fights you, and then they get frustrated. And sometimes terminology, the things that you say to them, like, hey, just do this, like, be relaxed or whatever, and crank it out. And to them, that might be a completely different word in their mind. And that's fine. Right? So somebody's going to execute a lift a little bit differently than maybe you will. Right? But again, find what looks right for them. Right? Guide them into the position they need to be in, and then let them go. Let's see what happens. But
so go back to the deadlift things you were saying earlier with the difference between the first and the second rep strength, because I think that's an issue that everyone kind of sees at some point, is that second rep moving a lot better than the first one. Would you say that's the biggest thing that you see, is just the height of the hip hike?
If they're doing it, yes, if they're doing it that way, absolutely. Now I've got lifters that do it on the second rep and it's no good, right? Mm-hmm. Clusters. Force them to if their first rep looks great, cluster the crap out of them, because they're going to get a lot of good repetitive positions. If their first rep sucks, then yeah, obviously giving them more of like a volume dose to kind of like give them the good reps, right? And allow them to kind of, challenge their ability to get into that position for the first one, and then go from there and kind of close that gap. Cool.
Are you kind of married to the idea of like, you write a block and you want to wait for it to pan out? Or are you more so, I mean, I'm sure it's kind of contingent upon like timing and close to meet and whatnot, but
yep.
How prone are you to just kind of saying screw it and changing something in the middle of a block, if that makes sense?
So that's that's definitely a lot of trust on both sides. You trust you trust what they're saying, right? To be like, hey, we're going to make this change.
Yeah.
Right. Or there's the trust of like, hey, it can't get any worse than this. Like, it's got to get better. Right. I can think of one athlete of mine that his bench was like, this is like 2 weeks out. This is like, you feel like a vibe, and you're like, all right, let's run with this and let's just see what happens. So he's like, hey, I feel better on my bench day, on his Larson day on Saturday versus his primary day on Friday. And he's like, I feel so much better on Saturday. It's like, screw it. Put a single on that day. I was like, I remember saying, like, don't increase the weight from last week on the primary. But I'm going to give you a single on Saturday, and I'm going to let you hit at the RP that we want for the week. It was like unbelievable, like amazing. And it was kind of like, it wasn't like bench was stalling. It was just slow, like it kind of, with bench, it's not the strongest lift for everybody, right? For the most part. And it can tend to be a little slow sometimes, right? And you're just kind of chipping away at it. And it was kind of in that zone for that. And I want to say it was like a 5 or 7 kilo PR. It was something crazy. And we ran it into the meet, had a phenomenal session or a phenomenal performance. And it was something we stuck with it. Now, this does bring up a point that I wanted to mention back about, intensity versus volume and stuff like that. I think that if your adjustment works really well, I'm a little guarded by how long it works. And I say that because I've done this situation where it's like, hey, I'm lacking that like strength, but I feel recovered. And we add some intensity to a primer or secondary, or maybe we do a descending rep approach on the secondary to get that weight up a little bit more. And it works well. And then you run it for like 2 or 3 blocks. And then you're like, not working as well as we would like. It's kind of flatlining. That's where I'm like, all right, I'm jumping back to what we did before. I'm going back. I'm taking that out. And I've seen it with bench. Like, I had a lifter that was like 92 kilo bench. And I was like, this is awesome. Intensity's working. And it was like on all days. She was a 3-day week lifter, 3-day bench session, right? Or 3 sessions a week. And she had some level of heavy exposure on each one. It was awesome. Then it stopped working. And then she backslid a little bit back to that like 87-ish number. 87. And I was like, I can't budge past it. And so we had a call actually in her prep, like for her, for her final week for prep for this meet, and we got her back. So I started pulling some intensity out, and I kind of was like, okay, 87's looking better now. This is looking a little bit healthier. It's not slow and grindy. 90's coming around, right? We're right there. So in her call, I kind of, again, you start probing questions and you're like, how's it feeling? Blah, blah, blah. And she's like, yeah, it's all right. And I'm like, well, this is what we have to do to get this peak to work on, the competition day on Saturday. So I'm going to move your primary. I moved her primary up, and I basically cut out her like this tertiary day. I basically flip-flopped them, right? So she was benching on a Wednesday, 2 days off. Now, mind you, this is short ROM. So let's go challenge the bias here. This is short ROM benching, like really short. So she had a secondary day on Wednesday. Monday was a primary. Saturday was this tertiary, this primary type day. Okay. So I flip-flopped and I put the primary on Saturday because, hey, we're about to compete. I want to get your primary on Saturday. This is this past week. 87 moved at like RP 7.5. I'm like, oh yeah, we're back. Right. So I put the tertiary, the tertiary, now I'm back in the same rhythm. I kept secondary on Wednesday. So like, that is where you can take the pendulum too far and it lives too long and it works for a little bit and then it doesn't work. Marcellus was the same way for his prep. Intensity was working. He was looking great. And then it stopped working. And that was on a really short scale. That was talking 3 weeks. Hers was like 2 blocks. Where it worked and then it kind of flatlined. And then I pulled that intensity away. I put kind of a little, I don't say I put a little bit more volume back in, but I was like, let's just tone this down a little bit. And, hers was right back in it. And then for Marcellus, we've added that volume back in and we tapered that volume as he was feeling a little bit more, beat up going into that meet, and boom, he hit he hit the PR. Right. Where at 4 weeks out, I'm like, I don't know. This is going to be a little risky here. This is a gamble. So being able to kind of know, like, you have like that intuition of like, I can't keep pushing this. It's not going to go. I lifter hit him all-time PR deadlift, all-time PR squat, all-time PR bench in this block. I told him straight up, I can't give you another block like that right now. We have to stop. We have to drop back. Like, I don't think that you're going to sustain another block. And he's prepping for a meet. So he's like, he's 4 blocks out. I'm not going to continue to run that. He'll burn out. Right. Because I think there's a level of like, you can push intensity too far to where they just stop coming strong. Like, it's not, they don't feel fatigued, but they're just not strong. And I think you can go that pendulum too. So that's kind of where I err a little bit more on the volume side originally, to have something to pull from. If I want to lace that, that obviously goes back to block periodization. That's their hypertrophy, strength, power, how you can shift those blocks. I think that still can exist to a degree for certain individuals. So, but yeah. And then obviously tie that into movement and all that. And now you're coaching.
Yeah. What do we have time for?
You guys want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, whatever.
Let's go.
Yeah,
Who wants to do the outro?
I'll do it.
What were you gonna say?
Oh, man, I think what you guys are doing is great. Just, it's learning, it's repetition, it's being able to practice your craft over time. Like, you can be the best, like, the more I'm gonna regret saying this as I get older. Damn it, I hate this. Oh god, I can't act this old when our lifter pool is like, in their 20s. So I got to act like I'm, 20 to stay, a bit more relevant here. But but in my age, you start to realize that you can learn all you want, and then you're not gonna you can sit there and read and all that kind of stuff, and I think that's extremely valuable. But being able to take that and put it into practice, and taking the things that you're learning and put it and being able oh, this is it. This is a spot where I can do something like this, where I think this will work really well. And then you do it, works great, cool, validation checked. If it doesn't, okay, what's going on? And being able to fall back to that tool set to be able to make the adjustments you need to make based off of it. It's like I said, I think you can take any program you want, yours, mine, intermediate, the free intermediate one. Like, you take any of them and you can apply it to somebody with the ability to kind of assess what the feedback is for that individual and then make the appropriate adjustments. So I think we do that constantly to be able to make the program work for somebody. And then you're constantly doing it to just double check every single time that it's in the right, it's still working for that lifter. So
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, outro time, no?
Yes.
Okay, hold on.
Perfect. Go ahead.
All right.
It never gets old.
Oh, wait, am I doing it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it.
All right, everyone.
I got it.
Oh, shit, Brad.
Oh, Brad, you want to do it?
I don't know what it is. What is it?
No, we don't have an outro. We just have like 2 sentences written on the Google Doc that I frantically recite at the end of each podcast. All right, hold on, ready? Everyone's quiet.
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you, everyone, for taking time to listen to the podcast. If you enjoyed it, you can subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, and rate us on Spotify. And check out Brad on Instagram. Brad, what's your Instagram?
Brad Couillard.
Couillard.
And that is all. See you later.